Today's video, it's all about a comparison between Petrobond sand and coal dust sand, and this is the pattern I'll be using for the comparison. I'll make a mould out of both and pour cast iron in them, and we'll see what happens. But also I've got a bit of metal left over and I'd like to see what my metal machine's like, so I'm making this flywheel up. This is the mould that I've made out of Petrobond sand. Going to pour cast iron in. The mould's ready to go. Well, we just finished the pour. There was the ingots. This is the first mould. It's got a bit of shrinkage. That's the second mould. And this is the third mould with all the risers. And what a sloppy job that was, pouring that wedge test. Here is the wedge test. It's completely grey all the way through. That's what I'm looking for. But have you ever wondered, will this iron chill? Well, I'll show you some more examples and we'll see what happens. Here is the leftover ingot. I've broken it in half. No chill whatsoever. Now the walls of that ingot mould are 5mm steel, so you'd think it would chill it, but it hasn't. Have a look at the next sample. This is the metal that I spilled while doing the wedge test. What makes this interesting though, it's spilled onto the cast iron mould weight, which is 20mm thick. So I've broken it in half and I'll show you what it looks like inside. This is what I spilled and it's broken in half, and we'll just see there it's white, just a little bit there, and the rest is grey. That is a really good example of soft iron, because normally if I spill it on the mould weight like that, it'll chill and it'll be white all the way through that iron. This is the Petrobond sand mould that I poured molten cast iron in. I'll knock it out and see what it looks like. Yeah, there's a few issues with Petrobond. I'll clean up the casting a bit more and show you what they are. All the castings have been cleaned up, and this is the first one I poured. This is in Petrobond sand, and I poured cast iron in there, and the first thing you'll notice is it's a highly reflective surface on it. This is one of the benefits of using Petrobond. Here is a close-up of the wrinkly surface, and as you can see there's little depressions in there. So what's been happening is the Petrobond sand being very fine, and with having oil it's lifting up the metal. That's no problem, but what happens is because it's so thin a casting, it's cooling down all the time. So what happens when it cools down and lifts up the metal, it hasn't got time to reform the shape of the mould again, so it leaves that little depression in there. One of the problems with having too fine a sand and also maybe too much oil, you would think that the mould will not fill up without vents, but there is no vents whatsoever on the mould. So you have a look at the casting here, there's no vents and it's still filled up. Most of the time if your mould does not fill up, it's usually because the metal is not hot enough. That wrinkly surface you've seen, I've had that in the past, so that's why I haven't really used Petrobond with iron. But it's not to say you can't use it, because I have on occasions lowered the pouring temperature of cast iron so low there was a risk that it would not fill up the mould, but it gave an outstanding finish. So what's the verdict for Petrobond with cast iron? It is doable, but you've got to do a lot of fiddling around to get it right. This is the second sand mould I poured. It's a comparison to the first one. The first one I poured was with Petrobond. This one is coal dust sand used as the facing sand. Yeah, this one came up much better. This is the second mould I poured, and I used coal dust in the facing sand. Now what happens with plaques like this is it's got a large surface area. You have to ram it very softly, and what happens is if you don't ram them softly you'll get expansion defects. But one of the problems of ramming them softly is you can see around the letters there that I didn't quite ram it enough, and the same with here. But also the other problem is just this area here, it was too softly rammed and the mould opened up a little bit. But overall it came out with a soft, nice, even surface finish over the cast surface there. And the other thing I wanted to say too is no vents, and it filled up the mould. Here is a section of the sand mould from this casting, and you can see a thin layer. That's the coal dust sand I've just sprinkled on there, and there's no coal dust in here. So you can ask, why haven't I got coal dust over here? Well, coal dust over here has no use because it's too far away from the edge of the mould, and also over time coal dust destroys the bond in sand, so you have to keep adding bentonite to it. And if you put facing sand on, this sand lasts a lot longer. Both my signs commemorating the fact that I've got 15,000 subscribers have been painted and cleaned up, and they look really nice. So what I'd show you first off is this one here is the Petrobond sand, and what I'll do, I'll show you both of them so you can get an idea of what each one looks like, and you can say which one looks the best. This is the second 15,000 subscriber commemorative plaque that I poured. This one was using coal dust as the facing sand. This one is a little bit different. You'll notice the background is even all over. That's from using coal dust, and this is the one I prefer. I reckon looks the best. What do you think? So if you're looking for something special to impress your subscribers and viewers, why not make something like this in cast iron? And I'm sure you'd be way ahead of everyone else on YouTube. This is the mould that's got all the risers, and I've used coal dust as facing sand. We'll knock it out and we'll see what it looks like. Yeah, so far it looks pretty good. This is the third sand mould I poured in cast iron, and I was using coal dust as the facing sand. And as you'll see around the edges there, very little has broken away. It's given a very clean casting. And the reason for that is because I'm using facing sand, and it's always new sand, and it's always strong, and it holds its shape a lot better. If you continually use older sand, it'll be prone to washouts. Now the other thing you'll see in here, this is different from all the other moulds I've shown you. There is the sprue, and the metal comes in here, then it goes into the first riser, and then what it does, it goes through the gate and then fills up the whole mould. And then the last part to fill up in the mould is this riser here. So what we've got here is a cold metal riser. This one doesn't shrink as much. But over here we've got the hot metal riser, because you're continually pouring in hot metal from the crucible. That shrinks a lot more. This one's larger because you've got to feed the rim. But this one here, I have experimented in making them smaller, but I've always had shrinkage dimples in the edges in here and also in the top part of the boss. So I found through experience that you have to make this a little bit larger because it's a cold metal riser. This casting was the third mould, also was the last mould. And normally with these castings, I usually pour these first or second to make sure they fill up all the spokes and the rim. But as you can see, as I poured it last, it still filled up the mould. So to know that my pouring temperature is correct. The one thing you may not see so well with the image is this spoke is fairly cool and smooth, and that tells me a warning sign. If I had poured this a little bit colder, it would not have filled up the mould. I've finished machining, so now what I've got to do, I've got to check very closely where it was gated and see if there's any shrinkage cavities or blowholes or any inclusions. And they will show up as holes in the casting. Here is the casting. It's all been machined up. So I've machined it up on the rim, on one face here, and the top of the boss. And it machines really great. This is where a joy of machining your own iron castings. Now this is where I expected to see maybe a blowhole where it was gated just in here, but I've machined the whole surface there of the rim, and it's come out really nice. This is a steam engine I built many years before I came onto YouTube, and you recognise this part here? That's the flywheel I've just made. So I'll give a quick demonstration of running. Then we run it in reverse. As you can see, I enjoy making models like this, and when you can cast your own iron castings, it just makes it so much better. One last thing, I wanted to have a look underneath the casting surface to see if there's any blowholes or other inclusions, and can't see any in the rim. That looks okay. And then we have a look at the centre boss and the spokes where they join. I can't see any flaws or any blowholes. And then we go across to the other side where I cut it with the angle grinder, and it looks okay there as well. So the casting looks perfect.